All right. We are on page 97 in the book. This is pride number 3. Now, we've been covering pride. This is the third one, dealing with pride. And this is the prophecy of Issachar and the sheepfold and how they relate to Eob. Now, we've saw about Eob and some of the things that he has gone through in his life. The name also is the name Yashub. Okay. And so he starts off, Shalom, everyone, praise Yahweh. I want to greet you differently today. He says, listen closely, Shalom, the saints of Yahweh and the priest of Yahweh. You can be seated. So notice he starts off with calling us the saints of Yahweh and the priest of Yahweh. Dealing, of course, with the fact that Yahweh's family is, of course, his priesthood, right? That's what it's made up of. This is the 13th chapter. So I did a little Yahmatria, okay? Of course, number 13 is Yahweh's attributes, but the first book of Israel, chapter 13, I put that in Yahmatria just to see what it was. And the English word 415 means the mighty one of Israel. And then 257 in the Jewish comes from 6043, which means Yahweh has answered. And the Sumerian 2858 means to close up, especially to seal, to make an end, to mark, and to stop. And I thought that was pretty neat because if you put it all together, you really have the mighty one of Israel, Yahweh, has answered, and he has sealed us with his mark, and soon we will stop man's government and make an end of sin, right? So that's pretty neat what Yahweh does with the numbers and stuff. Okay, let's get back here on page 97. Now, I'm not going to cover the first 3 verses there because it's talking about food and stuff. And like verse 3, that word suya, S-U-W-Y-A, I tried finding out what that was, but I can't seem to find what it is. It's probably misspelled. But anyway, verse 4 talks about the black-eyed peas. This was all dealing with out of Africa new moon, and as the Khan spoke about it before, it was very, very tasty, a very, very tasty meal. Very different from what we're used to eating and stuff, but it was very tasty. And fried black-eyed peas was really nice. Okay, let's start off here on verse 5. He says, the Vatican. He says, I want to speak on this right here. I want to point this out. And, of course, he reads an article that says the Vatican has stunned opponents. It says, Vatican says GM food is a blessing. The Vatican has stunned opponents of genetically modified foods by declaring that they hold the answer to the world's starvation and malnutrition. And Pastor says they certainly do. They hold the keys to starving the people to death and for bringing them the worst food ever. And if you remember, with the starvation and stuff that was going on, some countries that were starving, they sent them this GM food, and they actually rejected it. They said, no, we don't want it, because they knew what it was. They knew it was genetically modified food. And they actually refused it, So I guess I don't know if they, eventually what took place with them, but I do remember that being in the news. Now, verse 6, he says, they have done so with the beef, the goats, and the sheep. He says, I think I would be afraid to touch anything that was not from Texas. And the reason being, of course, because Texas, they take, we're covering about pride. Well, Texans pride their beef, the beef industry. They pride themselves upon their beef being the way it is, because Texas has a very large beef system, and they take care of their animals and stuff. So he says, I'm not just talking about the mad cow disease. I'm talking about the reason Eob's family and the livestock was taken from him. He was given others later, but they were clean and not defiled as the first ones were. If you remember, Yashub, or Eob 1, verses 4 and 5, this is talking about Eob's sons, and it says his sons were used to take turns holding feasts in their homes, and they would invite the three sisters to eat and to drink with them. And in verse 5, and when the days of feasting had run their course, Eob would send and have them purified. He would rise early in the morning and offer sacrifices for each of them. For he said, it might be that my sons have sinned and cursed Yahweh in their hearts. And Eob did this customarily. Okay? So you see here that they had these drinking parties. Okay? When it says that they had feasts in their homes, that word feast is number 4960, and that's really what it means, is drinking parties. Okay? And of course they invited their sisters. Well, why? For a family drink, you think? Or was it possibly that, it doesn't say, but they very well could have invited them over so that they would invite their friends over, because, we're dealing with the cardinal mind here. And we're dealing with the fact that all of Eob's family was actually defiled. And we know the family was defiled because the scriptures say that, and that's the reason why they were removed and they were replaced with others. At the end of Eob's trial, Yahweh gave him everything back, and even more so than that. He multiplied it greater than that. Now, verse 5, it says that Eob would purify them and offer sacrifices for them. We remember, sacrifices didn't take the place of sin. It didn't remove the sin. It was just a reminder, So if they were innocent in their actions, then these sacrifices didn't take away their sins, but it was a remembrance of their sin, And so it gave them something to think about what was taking place. But it showed Eob's righteous intentions and wanting to take care of his family and to try and teach them what they should be doing. Now, for a reference note, remember Deuteronomy 28:18, where it says, cursed will be the fruit of your body, and the produce of your lamb, and the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flocks. Deuteronomy 28:18. Remember, Deuteronomy 28 tells you about the blessings and the curses. But verse 18 tells you that your fruit of your body will be cursed, and, the calves, your herds, your lambs, your flocks, everything, your animal stock will be cursed if you do not keep Yahweh's laws. So, as it says here, this is the reason that Eob's family and livestock were taken from him, and he was given others later that were clean and not defiled as the first ones were. And remember, his wife was also cursed. He says, the only reason I want to bring this up is because we're going into this study on pride and Eob or Yashub, okay? Pride. Now, pride, of course, separates somebody from Yahweh. It defiles the mind, and it stops it from being able to accept anything from Yahweh, because you cut yourself off with pride. You cut yourself off from Yahweh. So this is the reason why he's referring to pride, and he keeps bringing it up, because the whole reason is we need, this book is called The Connection with Yahweh. We want to make that connection with Yahweh, not separate ourselves from him. All right, continuing verse 7 here in the book. Scientists, this is another article. He says, scientists in China have for the first time used cloning techniques to create hybrid embryos that contain a mixture of DNA from humans and rabbits. Humans and rabbits. Now, this is just one of the things that they're messing with. They're messing with a whole bunch more different things than this pertaining to humans. But he says, now if you can imagine what this is going to do to the bloodline, it's going to defile the bloodline if it gets out, okay? Because the law states do not commit bestiality, right? That's plain and simple. But this is scientifically being done in the laboratories when they do this, because they're mixing human and animal together, and that is bestiality, whether you do it in a test tube or whether you do the physical thing with the human body. Okay, it's still the same thing. It's against Yahweh's law. You can't play God and Creator and do these things. It's not meant. Mankind is not meant to do this. One day Yahweh will give us the power, but we will never, ever abuse that power of creation and maintaining life like the world has done today. So the law states that both the person and the animal really must be put to death, when that is done. And so it carries that much defilement according to Yahweh's law. So back to the book here. He says, this is what our ancestors were warned not to do. He says, I brought this out, and we had quite a long study on that before, showing what they're doing to the food supply. What they're doing to the food supply. You know, they're doing these things, and they're messing with the DNA, and they're also cloning, right? Well, the Israeli rabbi says eating cloned pork is kosher. Genetic engineering would prevent animal suffering. The prominent Israeli rabbi, Yisrayl says meat from a cloned pig would be considered as kosher under Jewish dietary laws. He's a leading scholar on the modern interpretations of Catherine, okay, and that's what is clean, okay, the modern interpretations, okay, and he's advocating for rabbinic approval of cloned meats. In an interview, this rabbi makes the case that transgenic or cloned meat would not be subject to the same kashrut dietary laws that guide what is kosher or fit for consumption by Jews. He argues that under the Hillelic system, when a pig's cell is used and food is produced from the genetic material, the cell actually loses its original identity, and therefore it cannot be defined as prohibited food. He says that because the meat grown from cells in a lab would have lost its identity, observant Jews could also be able to eat it alongside dairy products. The leading Hillelic authorities permitted eating gelatin from animals' origin, claiming that in the process of production, it loses its flavor and is not edible, and therefore is no longer considered edible. And there is no Hellenic prohibition against eating it, he said. Okay, so they eat, they eat pig gelatin too, as well. So that's why you have to be careful when you see anything that has gelatin in it to make sure that it is kosher. Okay, back to the book. So you can see they're doing this to the food supply. And notice he says it's nothing new. Because remember, there's nothing new going on now that hasn't been done in the past. And he says they were doing it back then. They were warned not to do it, but they did it in Egypt. They did it in Egypt. They were warned not to do this, but they did it in Egypt. You remember the Egyptian gods? The Egyptian gods were half human and half animal, okay? And when you go through the scriptures, and especially the plagues, okay, in the 10 plagues, you can see that every one of those plagues was against one of the Egyptian gods. And each one of those Egyptian gods were part human and part animal, okay? For instance, you had some that were, and this was gods and goddesses, okay? You had the goddesses, the beautiful goddesses, just like, they always made the goddesses look so beautiful and look so enticing and stuff, right? And they would always drape the thin clothing over their bodies to really entice the man to look at them and so forth. Well, start at the feet and going up. When you reach the head and you see this big lion's head on top, that would really change a person's mind, I think, when they looked upon it. But this is what they did. They had the gods and the goddesses were part animal and part human, and people blow this off and they think, oh, that's just the way that they were created, pictured and depicted and so forth like that. But that's not what the scripture says, Yahweh didn't say don't do these things if it wasn't being done, okay? There's a prohibition against these things. And of course, Satan and the gods do everything that's just opposite of it, and then you had the men. You had the big muscular bodies and stuff of the gods and stuff. And like I said, you look at the head, and the head would be the head of a jackal or head of a falcon, And so they mix these things. And of course, they always said that this always, they blow it off and try and say, well, it's referring to the facts of some of the characteristics of the god and stuff. Well, yeah, it is. But wasn't Satan also characteristic of being male and female? Anything goes in Satan's world and stuff, So these things are done deliberately. They're not something that's just, happen chance, as they say. There's a reason behind all these things. And this was just to draw somebody into the God worship. It was to entice people into it. Because, man, as the scripture says, man is never satisfied with his lust. And so he goes after anything and everything. So let's continue the book here. He says, let's see something. Leviticus 19. Let's look at this right here, because since we're talking about this, defilement, this is a reference note here too, Leviticus 19:19. But I want you to look at the side note that's there. Leviticus 19:19, he says, "You must keep my statutes. You must not let your livestock breed with another kind. You shall not sow your field with mixed seed." And if you see the seed right there, okay, there's a side note. And it says, Yahweh separated each beast after its kind, according to Genesis 1:1-25. So this is not speaking of crossbreeding two different kinds of cattle. What this actually means, however, is that man must not deviate from the appointed order of things, nor go against the eternal laws of nature as established by Yahweh. For instance, altering the genes of an animal to be able to mix with the plant, or to alter the genes of two different species of animals so that they can be crossbred, such as crossing a dog with a cat. And this scripture also refers to one who is of the house of Yahweh marrying an unbeliever, okay? Because you can't mix the seed, okay? You wouldn't want to mix righteous seed with unrighteous seed, okay? So you have to be careful with all of these things, very careful. Okay, back to the book here. This is verse 8. He says, "Here is what they condemn. They don't want you to get into any sunshine," he says. Some great studies are coming out now because of some of the things that were said about Dr. Barefoot and some of the others. And if you remember in earlier chapters, we talked about some of those things. He's taken a tongue lashing from the doctors. He says, I guess you've noticed that. The statements that he made there were statements from scientists. They were done from extensive research. They were not attacking what he said, but they were attacking him as a person. And that's exactly what they do, character assassination, right? Tear down a person. It's not the fact that they could go against the facts that he was bringing out about health and stuff, but they went against him as a person. Now he gets into another article here, and he says, and this is verse 9, he says, "People who receive more sunshine exposure during their childhood and adolescence might have a reduced risk of developing multiple sclerosis," says a study in this week's issue of the British Medical Journal. Okay, so you see there that sunshine is very healthy. It's very healthy to the bones. You need that vitamin D. Highlight this next sentence. Yahweh always backs up his house when we bring out information concerning him and his creation. Okay? He always backs up his house when we bring something out, information concerning him and his creation, because of the fact that if it's written in the scriptures, it's true. Okay? And if you notice, the house of Yahweh will bring something out, and then later on, you'll see it come out into the news as they discover something, What they discovered was the fact that, hey, the house of Yahweh was telling the truth the whole time. But they don't admit that, of course. Okay, back to the book here, verse 10. He says, "You all heard about the blackout in New York City. I think most people just thought all that was done was to wipe out electricity. But he says that's not what it does. The world right now is geared to electricity. Without it, nothing can operate. There goes the electricity. Yes, but there goes your refrigerators. If you notice, he says, they were stripping the food out of the stores as badly as it was needed, throwing it away because it turned bad and rancid. The cooling goes down and your lights go down and your television sets go down. Okay, everything, because everything is based upon electricity. He says, now if you have your own propane tank, it will not quit until it runs out. But there's no electricity when it runs out. I guarantee you that you won't get it filled again. It depends on the electricity to get those things refilled, refurnished, and even the orders made for the company to bring gas. This is true for gasoline. And what will occur if your car runs out of gasoline? When the electricity went out, they were unable to get gas. This morning it says there were long lines at the few gas stations that were now open in operation. And the water supply is also based on electricity. So when the electricity goes down, the water supply goes with it. Imagine if you're one of those New York apartments and you have a commode, and that's the only thing that you have. You're going to use it, right? I tell you, that house is going to be stinking in a little while because you cannot flush it because there's no water. The water is also run on electricity, and so is your telephone, so that you cannot call for help either. So you can see what the world has done. You know, technology has softened mankind so much and has made mankind so dependable upon things to where nowadays, you know, when electricity goes out, everything is just shut down. Nobody knows what to do. Everybody freaks out. It's like, we've got no electricity, you know. But that's not the way it was. And this is what Pastor was always talking about. You know, this is not the way it was 100 years ago. For 6,000 years, they didn't have it. But in these last days, we've become so accustomed and so soft to these things to where every generation that passes by gets softer and softer and dumber. You know, this is why the children, books, what is a book? You know, they don't know what a book is. You know, because to them, a book is an e-book. You know, open up your computer and read off the screen and stuff. But don't give them any printed book. To them, that's nothing. You know, they don't like that kind of stuff. And every generation is getting worse and worse because it's being drawn further and further and further away from the truth. You know, and of course you got to read in order to know the scriptures, to learn the scriptures, and to get away from that is what Satan is doing with this world. Okay, the next verse here, this is verse 13 here. Highlight this next sentence. The only reason I am mentioning that is that you really need to start working towards getting free from the services of mankind. Okay? And we do. You know, the thing is that with Yahweh's work, it depends a lot upon electricity, you know, and I think Yahweh willing, it will continue on, but we know that there's going to come a time probably when we'll be shut off, we know. But the work will be done. The work will be accomplished. That part of the work will be accomplished to where it won't need that. But he says it does seem like they're going to diminish. To me, it seems like the quickest thing a terrorist would do, or would want to do, is to knock out the electricity before it knocks out anything else. We have people who are willing to give up their lives in the world today. We have sin-sick minds all over the world who are willing to die for the cause of hurting someone else. You know, and that is a sin-sick mind, because the fact is they just want to hurt. That's why they're called terrorists. Terrorists want to put terror in people. They're not so much concerned about, it's not the killing aspect. It's the terror, it's the fear, it's the fright that it puts into people's minds. That's what they thrive on, and that's why they're called terrorists. And that's what they go after, is to try and put the fear tactic in the minds of the people. And of course, it builds up hatred. And their hatred is geared towards the United States. Because, you know, the United States, remember, we mentioned in prophecy, the United States is in Revelation 13, is the second beast. And we're pushing forward the first beast throughout the entire earth, warning others to make themselves into the image and the likeness of the first beast. And that's what they don't like. And that's what they're fighting against. And that's the reason why they fight against the United States being the way it actually is. In verse 14, he says, that is part of the breeding that Yahweh did not want in Yeshua. Neither did he want it in you. You know, Yahweh carefully watches over us. And he called us out of this sin-sick world and started making us into his image. And remember, he's still creating us. You know, we're not a finished creation yet. He's still working with us. And he doesn't want that hatred in us. He doesn't want that pride in us. He wants these things to come out of us, to get out of it. And that's why we have to work. You know, you're born with the mind to hate your creator. You're born with the mind to hate everything. You're just full of hate. You know, and if that mind like that develops, then you just become a very hateful person. and you're just completely terrible and miserable. And that's what the gods want. You know, they want you to be that way. So to you, you're a prime target for their picking and playing, you know. But yet Yahweh calls us out and then starts training us and shows us that we can take that carnal mind and we can put it down, and we begin to take on a spiritual mind, and as we're fed his spirit. And then we become, and that's what we're being made into his image and likeness. We're being made like Yahweh, to become like him, you know. But that's the struggle that we have with the carnal mind, is that, you know, we'll falter and fall, but we'll pick ourselves back up and keep on going. So he didn't want this. He said, this part of the breeding that Yahweh did not want in Yeshua, neither did he want it in you. And this is the reason, too, he says, that you're not having the same difficulties as the world is right now. What you're seeing from the newspaper reports that Elder Yedidiah brought out is going to get much worse than this. And if you think back on a lot of the things, Khan Yedidiah gave out a bunch of stuff, man. And he did give a lot of horrible things. But it has gotten worse since that time. In verse 15, he says, I was reading this morning where someone handed me an article where they were putting out propaganda. They checked back in history and found out where many, many nations had articles that were actually permitted the same-sex marriages. And they blessed the same-sex marriages. If they did it, why don't we do it today? Why are we throwing such a fuss about it? There's still a little bit of righteousness, he says, left out there, I guess. Not much, but enough to fight against some of these things that the Catholic Church is bringing forth. But, of course, now it's totally different, because now they have succeeded, and, of course, you know, the government actually protects this lifestyle, this form of lifestyle. But remember what it says in Leviticus 18:22. You shall not have sexual relations with the man as with the woman. It's an act that, notice, is injurious. It's injurious to others. It injures the man and it injures the woman when these things are done. Leviticus 20, verse 13 says, if a man has sexual relations with the male as he has sexual relations with the woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon their own heads. Notice it's an abomination, which means it passes poison on to another, right? And their blood will be upon their own head, because the poison blood that's passed on, it's going to be from their own fault, because it's from their own actions. And the infection of their blood is going to be from their own actions, is going to be passed on. And like it says, it's injurious to others because of the fact that when you have to go out and deal with the world, and you have to deal with some perverts like that, you know, they have defiled everything that they touch and spread this stuff all over the place. And so it can be injurious. And so we have to take proper precautions, and that's what the house of Yahweh teaches. You know, the Catholic Church has put this, as it says here in verse 16, the Catholic Church is the one who has put this in all nations. It's part of their teachings. You know, in the Catholic Church, they put in the nations just the fact that they now have rights. You know, they have rights to protect sin. Not righteousness, but sin. You can be persecuted and put in jail for righteousness. But if you sin, you're okay. You're protected if you sin, have a sinful lifestyle. And it's a part of their teaching, you know, and like it says, it's their God-given right. One of the gods has a right to do this in their sick minds, and they have to do it, or they say that they will have to do it to ease their conscience while they do these sickening things, okay? You know, but from the beginning, it started, remember? Has Yahweh indeed said, come on, has Yahweh really said that you can't be attracted to this man over here? What's wrong with that? Come on, man, you know? And that's how it began. As Yahweh indeed said. Everything was based on, think about that. When you read in the scriptures, has Yahweh indeed said, all the 613 laws are being spoken about there. That this began to put into that. Now, the whole world has gone the way of Cain. And if the whole world has been sodomites and adulterers and fornicators, what was Cain? All of those things. Remember, he was a God worshiper. He did all of those things. Why? Because, as Yahweh indeed said, you know, that's what he was tempted with and taught with, and that's what he went. That's what he followed. All those things. You remember in Romans for your notes here. Romans chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. Yahweh says, for this reason Yahweh gave them up to degrading passions. Okay, he gave them up. He said, you want degrading passions, you can have them. For even their women exchanged the natural use into which was against nature. So this is not the way that man and woman was made to begin with. And the men did the same thing, leaving the natural use of the woman. They burned in their lust for one another, men committing shameful acts with men. And notice, suffering in their own bodies the penalty of their error, which is their fitting retribution. Of course, that doesn't mean that Yahweh is vengeful and punishing them, but they're bringing this upon themselves because they're going against the warning that was given to them not to do it. And so since they did not like to retain Yahweh in their knowledge, and of course this shows that at one time it was given to them, but they rejected it. Remember, they rejected it. It was passed on, this rejection, to future generations. Then Yahweh simply gave them over to a reprobate mind. He allowed them to choose the way of life of sin, to do those things which are not proper, because he's not going to force anybody. He doesn't force anyone to do anything. You know, he says this is a choice. You can choose life or you can choose death. It's all according to what you want. Okay. Back to the book here. Verse 17. He says, you will see more propaganda like this. And they will make it look like Sunday, Christmas, and Easter, where it looked good on the surface to you, right? It looks good on the surface. Notice on the surface, but not deep under where the sin, the real harm is, right? Because it's made to look like, well, what harm is it to let somebody enjoy themselves? What harm is that, you know? You know, you don't have, the harm is it's an abomination, remember? It's an abomination, and that means poison. And that poison is passed on to others and to yourself if anybody partakes of those things. So that's the harm in it. And that's the reason why Yahweh says, don't do these things. But they make it look good on the surface, you know. And if you remember, you know, we gave the prophetic words and stuff had many issues dealing with all of these sin-sick things and actually showing you the problems that it's caused with it, you know. But people overlook those things. They never think about the fact that if they choose that lifestyle, what they're in for, you know. They never think about the consequences. Well, verse 18 here. Applauding. Okay, this is one of your vocabulary words. You might highlight that word. The applauding. He says, a few years ago, I would have fussed about this because I actually thought that it was going to the one who was doing the speaking. Then I saw in the scriptures that it was not. Now highlight this next sentence. It actually goes to Yahweh who teaches the man and the man who represents him. Okay? That's what the applauding is about. It goes to Yahweh who teaches the man and the man who represents him. Okay? And so when pastor comes out and we're all cheering and shouting, you know, and applauding to Yahweh and praising Yahweh, we're giving him the honor because he is Yahweh to us, right? He is the representative of Yahweh speaking. So therefore, when you honor the representative of Yahweh, you're honoring Yahweh, right? And that's the same exact thing that Yeshua Messiah taught when he said, you honor the Son, you honor the Father, right? So that has to do with the applauding. So he says, no matter who he is behind the pulpit, he deserves the applauding or this approval, the hand clapping. Here's the next word, vocabulary word. Underline this, next two sentences here. The hand clapping is what I'm talking about. He says it means to show approval or enjoyment by clapping the hands or by cheering, stamping of the feet to praise, approve, and commend. Okay? So underline that whole section there. The hand clapping and applauding. This is all in honor and glory of Yahweh. It has nothing to do with the fact that you're applauding the person themselves, but the one whom he represents. Okay. And he continues on in verse 19. He says, there's one who did not do this in one place. He says, you might want to write it down. In 2 Samuel 6, 12 through 23, she refused to do it. And as a result, she remained childless as far as I know. He says, unless someone else has pointed out to me in the scriptures that she also lost her hope for eternal life. And, of course, what he's talking about here is who? Michal. Remember Michal? Okay, and he already made 2 references before, remember? Dealing with Michal, saying how Michal wouldn't be too joyful when she heard all the shouting and joys and stuff that's giving praise and honor to Yahweh and so forth. Okay? 2 Samuel 6, let's look at this. I'll look at this story. In 2 Samuel 6, 11 through 23, it says, the ark of Yahweh remained in the house of Edom, the Gittite, the 3 moons, and Yahweh blessed him and all his household. Then King David was informed about this and was told, and Yahweh blessed the house of Obed-Edom and everything that he has, because of the ark of Yahweh. So David went down and brought up the ark of Yahweh with rejoicing from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David. And when they had carried the ark of Yahweh, had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fatted sheep. Now notice that 6 steps. As soon as they had carried the ark, 6 steps. And I thought, 6 is the number of man, showing the fact that Yahweh was with man at that time. So he sacrificed the bull and the fatted sheep. And then David, who was notice he was wearing a linen ephod. He danced in front of Yahweh with all of his might. David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh with shouts and with the sounds of trumpets. And the ark of Yahweh came into the city of David. Michal, daughter of Shaul, watched through a window, and she saw King David leaping and dancing in front of Yahweh, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought the ark of Yahweh and set it in its place. In the middle of the tent, David had set it up. Then David sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings in front of Yahweh. And when David had finished sacrificing burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people with the name of Yahweh Almighty, notice. Then he distributed to each person among the whole multitude of Israel, men and women, a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins. And then all the people left and went to their homes. When David returned home, notice what he was going to do, to bless his own household now. Michal, the daughter of Shaul, came out to meet him and said, "Oh, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself this day, uncovering himself in the sight of the maids of his attendants, just as a lowly man would do." And David said to Michal, this was in front of Yahweh, who chose me rather than your father or anyone else from all his house, when he appointed me ruler over Yahweh's people, over Israel. And I will celebrate in front of Yahweh. And I will become even more undignified than this woman. And I will be humble in my own eyes. But as for the maids whom you spoke about, they will hold me in honor. And because of this, Michal, the daughter of Shaul, had no children to the day of her death. For she cut herself off from her husband. Not only was this her husband, this was her king. This was the righteous king of Yahweh, the anointed one of Yahweh, that she cut herself off from. And it makes it look like, when you read that, it makes it look like, oh, well, he's, she says, well, he's, in this verse, he's uncovering himself, just like a low man, right? Well, remember, he wore a linen ephod. In 1 Chronicles, it tells you also a little bit more. 1 Chronicles 15:27. David was clothed with a robe of fine linen. So it was fine linen, just as all the Levites who carried the ark. Were the Levites lowly men? They were carrying the ark of Yahweh. The singers, and Chenaniah, the music director of the singers. And David also wore linen ephod. So notice, David was girded with a fine linen ephod, which others beside the priests sometimes wore, just as Samuel, the prophet, did, and which David might choose to appear in, rather than, of course, his royal robes, as being more agreeable to the service of Yahweh, lowering himself down, dressing like the others who served Yahweh, rather than in his kingly robes, making himself look higher and mighty. And of course, it had been lighter for him to both walk and to dance on the occasion too. So he did nothing wrong. He humbled himself actually before Yahweh, and because of that, he was condemned. Okay, so he's given an example here. So he gave that example referring to Michal, the fact that she didn't want to rejoice before Yahweh, okay? And then in verse 20 here, back on the book, it says in Psalm 47, verse 1, it says, all nations clap your hands, because it's an open display of rejoicing, okay? So highlight that part. All nations clap your hands is an open display of rejoicing, okay? Because that's what clapping does. You know, when you clap your hands, it shows that you are in agreement with something. Then he says, 2 Kings 11:12, the people clap their hands and rejoice. So you see that, you know, when they clap in their hands, they were rejoicing before Yahweh. So they did the same thing when Yeshua rode a donkey into the town, praising Yahweh for it, because they knew that he was the Savior of that day. The Savior of that day. They knew that. Remember, they rejoice. The reference over there would be Matthew 21, 8 through 10. You know, and the fact is, there's more verses than that, but the thing is that here, when Yeshua came, you remember, this is when he sent his disciples, go and get the donkey, the donkey and the coat, right? And he rode on both of them. And as he rode into Jerusalem, the people were greatly rejoicing. They were taking branches and throwing branches down, the palm branches, and for the donkeys to walk on, so it wouldn't even have to touch the dirt, you know. And people were throwing down their cloaks and their robes and stuff, so that, you know, this is a show of great honor, you know, that this was their king coming in. And people were greatly rejoicing. Some people didn't even know who he was, and they were asking, who is this man, you know? And they said, he is the prophet, you know. He's the great prophet, Yeshua, you know. He's come. But the sad thing about it is, only a few days later, they killed him. They were all greatly rejoicing at this time, but it didn't take long but a few days, and they ended up killing the man, murdering him, giving him to the slaughter. Okay, so let's continue in the book here. This is verse 21. He says, now if you remember, the subject here was pride. He says, I think I've spoken twice on it. Highlight from here the word all the way down to the end of the paragraph there. The word pride and the action of being proud are something that is taught and pushed today in society. They want you to be proud of your country, proud of your city, proud of whatever things they provide for you, proud of your police and fire departments, right? They want you to be proud of everything. Highlight all of that. You know, and really, when you think about it, it starts at birth, doesn't it? Because what did they say? Well, this is the proud parents of so-and-so. The proud parents of so-and-so. They're proud for their child. They're so proud of their child, you know. And so this is put in the mind when a person is born. And this is something that you have to fight with the cardinal mind. Okay, so he continues. Now, this is the definition of the word pride that he reads again in verse 22. It says, in people, it implies such consciousness of high station rank as is displayed in scorn of some of those considered beneath one or for an authority over you. Okay, so it puts a consciousness of a highness in your mind. You know, when you get prideful, you get high, and you think and you scorn others who are below you. You know, especially if it's authority and you got to deal with a problem with a supervisor. You know, you put them below you. You know, you lift yourself up, and you just can't submit yourself to him. He says, well, that is what pride implies. Now, highlight the rest of this paragraph. When you see a person who is too proud to take the advice of the counselors or consider the advice of the elders, this is pride that gets in their way. They would have to put themselves down. And in their own minds, they're thinking, if I accept this, I'm putting myself down and putting this person over me. Or he will think that he is over me if I do this. Okay, so you can see that, you know, it's crazy, but that's what pride does to a person. But when we look at what the Scripture says, in Proverbs 19, verses 20 and 21, it says, listen to advice and accept instruction. And in the latter days, you will be wise. Does anybody want to be dumb? Does anybody want to be ignorant? We all want to be wise. In the last days, listen to advice and accept instruction. What's hard about that? It's not when you realize that it's going to make you wise. Many plans are in the mind of a man, but nonetheless, it's Yahweh's purposes which will prevail. So what's he saying there? Yahweh is in full control, right? Yahweh is in full control. Yahweh's purposes are going to prevail. So even though you have these different plans that's in your mind, Yahweh's still going to be the one in control. And he's going to allow to take place his will. Not ours, but his. And so like it says, listen to advice and accept instruction. Accepting correction, notice. Because in the last days, it's going to make you wise. And that's exactly what we need. We need to be wise. So counseling is actually for our own protection of life that Yahweh's created us for. He's created us so that we can have life. That's what he wants to give unto us. Here's another reference. So what's in Matthew 11, verse 28 and 29? This is Yeshua speaking, and notice what he says. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. For I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And notice you've got to humble yourself, and when you humble yourself, you find rest, or you find that peace of mind. You don't have peace of mind when you have to struggle and try and keep yourself up on top, right? By lifting yourself up through pride. But you will find rest if you humble yourself. And that's why he says, learn of me. Learn the way that he is. Learn the way that Yeshua, the example that Yeshua set. Okay? Let's go back to the book here on verse 23. Continuing on now, he continues to read the definition of pride. And it says it implies both haughtiness and great contempt. Haughtiness, you're making yourself haughty. You're making yourself, thinking yourself more highly than you ought to, above others. And when you're haughty, you put others down, And so you're making a god out of yourself, but you're too stupid to know it, right? When a person gets pride and they stand up on pride, they're too stupid to know that they're lifting themselves as a god. They're making themselves as a god, because this is exactly what Satan did. And great contempt, notice, especially as manifested in behavior or speech that insults or affronts others. And that's exactly what it gets to a point to where a person will get that way, right? If they keep feeding the pride and feeding it, then they end up, their behavior turns on them, and their speech comes out and they begin insulting other people and so forth. So it's a very horrible thing, and nobody likes to be around somebody when they get that way, right? You just want to take off and run away from a person like that because you see how ugly they are. It really reveals the ugliness of sin, The essence of sin is there, and it's really disgusting to a person. So he continues on, he says, I'm speaking here of others who Yahweh has given authority, which Yeshua endorsed and manifested to his disciples. He said, Yahweh has given me authority over all things, and what Yahweh has given me, I give to you. I give to you. You remember he said that in Matthew 28, if you want to write that down, Matthew 28, 18 through 19. He says, all authority is given to me in heaven and in earth. Okay? So he reached that point. Remember, Yeshua is the firstborn among many brethren. And so if Yeshua received that authority, we are guaranteed to receive that authority as well. But along with authority comes the great responsibility, right? And you'll always, that's why we learn now to be submissive, because you'll always have someone over you. Throughout all eternity, you're always going to have someone over you. But at the same time, you're always going to be over someone else, because the whole universe is going to depend upon you. And that's what he talks about here. He says, soon, brethren, we will have authority over life, which means that you're going to be able to remove life as well, right? You'll be able to take a life. If it would interfere with the plan of Yahweh, you would be able to remove it. But then you can always return it back later, right? But you will have authority over life. Life itself, notice. Life itself, the power of life. You'll have authority over the judgments. You know, we will rule by the judgments of Yahweh. That's what it's all about. And we will have, we'll have the wisdom to know and to teach others the great judgment and the prophecies, because this is what we'll be able to teach them. This is what will come upon you if you do this. And this is what will come upon you if you do that. And so the laws of Yahweh, when he talks about the laws, statutes, and the judgment, you can see this all based upon judgments, is that you're judged upon your actions on whether you work with righteousness or go against righteousness. You work with it, you see the blessings. You go against it, you see the curses. And that's what it's all based upon. And Yahweh wants to give life. Remember, he says, I don't want anybody to perish. I want everybody to have life. You notice he says, you'll soon have authority over the life of the nations. The life of the nations. They will rely upon us to sustain their life. Think about that. The life of the nations are going to be in your hands, because you will have the authority over their food supply. Remember what it says in the prophecies, where it says that you will cut off the rain if they don't come to keep the feast? You'll have that authority. Not that you're going to starve them, but you're going to teach them, look, when they see the rain is cut off, it's like, now, do you understand why you want to keep the feast? Because this is where the blessings are, But everything that supports life and keeps something living, you're going to have that authority to be able to keep that life living. The life of the nations, and notice, the life of the kingdoms outside of the nations, or outside of the earth. We'll have authority over all things that make up creation, all the microbes in the universe. That's life. And we're going to have the power, the authority. And that's two different things, the power and authority. Power is the power to be able to do something, but you can't do anything even if you had all the power in the universe, unless you had authority, right? You have to have the authority to use and execute that power in order to do something. And this is why Yahweh is the ultimate source of all power and life, because he keeps everything in the universe into motion, and he grants life, and he keeps all life going. So that's a pretty incredible statement there, about life, authority over all life itself. Life. We tend to forget that because we just, we have life, we go on and so forth. But we forget where our life comes from. We forget what our life actually is. Hold your breath for 5 minutes and see if you can remain alive. You can't do it. Your life would cease from your body, and your body would knock itself out. But that's the defense that Yahweh put in your body, that he would simply knock you out so that you would start breathing again to wake up. But all of these things that make up the human body and that keeps it alive, this will be the authority. But you'll have the knowledge, the wisdom, and the understanding, because you're going to have to know, how do you maintain life? How can you maintain life unless you know what makes life and what keeps life going? You'll have to know all of these things that keep a body alive. Everything that keeps a function, that keeps a cell alive. A cell, you can spend a lifetime just studying one little cell, the way it operates. I mean, it's got power stations in there that produce electricity, and the electricity the cell uses this, and then it goes out and it jumps from signal to signal, throughout the body, like the brain, you've got electronic signals going back and forth, all of these intricate details that's there. Remember, we're going to be flesh and spirit, or flesh and bone, but you're not going to have the poison blood. Okay, you're not going to have the blood that carries the poisons and so forth in the body, that gets rid of it, that cleanses the body in that sense. That's why we have blood now. But when you have spirit flowing through you and you have flesh, you're going to have flesh and spirit. Remember when Yahshua appeared to his disciples, they said at first they were scared, and they thought they were seeing a spirit. He says, come here. Put your hand in my side and look at my hands. A spirit doesn't have flesh and bone like I have, So he just showed them a little taste of the power of what he had, where he could actually walk through walls. Just think about that. You can kind of speculate like, okay, Now, how did he do that? Now, we know atoms have space because there's no such thing as empty space, right? Atoms are popping up here and there and there in places. So space is always being occupied by atomic structure somehow. So what did he do? Since the space is between the atoms in the mortar, or the brick and so forth, the stones and the rocks, did his atoms, like separate and then they fit through and squeeze through those little spaces that's in there and he popped out and then on the other side of the wall, he came back together again? Well, one day we'll learn. We'll know exactly how Yahweh did it, right? But those are things that just show the power of Yahweh. And these are the things that he shows that we're going to do. And you wouldn't do that to show off to someone, because that's pride. See? Pride is showing off. And you're never, ever going to abuse and misuse the power and authority from Yahweh that you have. You're always going to be using it to serve someone. You will never, ever abuse it in any way. That reminds me of, how they got all these stupid books of the Bibles, these fake books and stuff in the Bibles. One of them, I forget which one it was, but it talked about when Jesus was little, he'd go play with his friends, and he would make clay birds and throw them up in the air and make them alive and let them fly off. It's like, yeah, right. He's really going to abuse his power and authority, But that's the way that the world thinks, To them, they think it's true, Okay, let's get back to the book here. Verse 24. He says it gives an example, and now he gives another definition of the word pride. She has an insolent disregard for her servants' feelings or even their needs. An insolent disregard, notice, for her servants' feelings or even their needs. He says it says she, that's the reason why I read it that way. But he says, I have seen she's who showed this very thing to the people around them, even the elders who were over them. And if she was above them and would not lower herself to listen, even now I would say that they're not here to hear the tree fall. So they probably would never hear this sound again. They'll never hear that warning again. Now he continues on in the definition of pride. He says it means overbearing, implies extreme, domineering insolence. It stresses aloof, scornful manner. Aloof means to be detached, okay? A scornful manner, like you're detaching yourself from everybody around you. You're better than everybody else, right? Like the holier-than-thou attitude, okay? He said that's putting themselves above. The same things he said that describes Satan. Intellectual snob implies even stronger and more overt feelings of scorn for that which is regarded as beneath them or the authority over them. And we have to think about it. It's not like pride is not something that the house of Yahweh practices, but anybody can be tempted with pride, right? And sometimes you might be tempted with something, and you might lift yourself up and think of yourself a little bit more higher than someone else. And when you do, you have to keep yourself into check and realize, wait a minute, that's the characteristic of Satan. That's pride. And you have to examine yourself and bring yourself back down to the way that Yahweh wants us to be. Verse 26 here, he says, I read that to you before, he says, and I'll try to skip part of what we have here. We went through the righteousness of Job, or Eob, or Yashub, as his name is also applied. He was named after Yeshua, or the name that implies Yahweh will bring salvation. His name being Yashub, as it is in Eob, but it's also later as Yashub, shown in similar scriptures. In verse 27, he says, now he was the third son of Issachar. Okay, Yashub was the third son of Issachar. And you find that in Genesis 46, verse 13. Genesis 46, verse 13. You find that Yeshua was the third son of Issachar. He says, if you look at that name closely, you'll see that it's rather identical, rather it's like Isaac. And it has kind of the same meaning as the word Isaac, who was one of his ancestors. Okay? We need to quit. It's 8 o'clock. All right, well, let's go ahead and stop here. We'll stop here on verse 27. We'll take off with that thought next class. some interesting little thing that tidbit of information that's found in that verse there. But we'll cover that next week. Yahweh bless you, man.